Hey, welcome back, folks. Today we are going to dive into the expert testimony from the Wayfarer Party. Now, the expert testimony in the exhibits is document 1113, Exhibit 1. And this says that it was completed on October 10th, 2025. And this is James F. Haggerty, and he is CEO of Haggerty LLC. Some people are going to look at the expert report and think that this is some form of evidence or proof. But what the expert report actually is what we're going to talk a little bit about before we go through everything that's in this document. An expert report is not a finding of fact. It's not a ruling, and it's not proof that something happened. What an expert report is and what it's performing as within the docket in relation to this case is that it offers an opinion, an informed opinion at that, to help a court or potentially a jury understand technical or specialized issues in relation to a case. And in this situation, based on assumptions and materials selected by the party who retained them. Experts do not decide credibility, juries do. Judges decide whether it's admissible. An expert offers an opinion to help a court understand technical or specialized issues based on assumptions and materials selected by the party who retained them. Experts do not decide credibility, juries do. In this situation and other cases, judges decide admissibility. So essentially, that's what we're going through right now is the judge's ability. The judge is making decisions on what is admissible and what will be seen or not seen by a jury when it goes to trial. Haggerty was retained as an expert, not as a witness. This isn't a deposition. This is a report. He did not observe any of the events in relation to this case. He's somebody who's coming in after the fact and looking at the same things that we're looking at. Well, probably more because he's behind the scenes and is in contact with the legal team. And then based off of his experience and knowledge, he is providing an analysis. And based on information and assumptions provided to him for the purpose of forming an opinion. Much of Haggerty's report follows an if-then structure. So if the plaintiff's account is accurate, then certain behaviors could be consistent with particular patterns. That is fundamentally different from saying those events definitively occurred. Courts routinely allow experts to assume disputed facts for analysis. That doesn't mean that the court or a jury has accepted those facts as true. In this situation, nothing in Haggerty's report determines that Justin Baldoni committed sexual harassment, assault, or predatory conduct. Experts are not empowered to make those determinations. Using an expert report to label someone a predator conflates opinion with verdict. And that's just not how the justice system works. In this situation, they are presenting this information in order for a jury to make a decision based off of that information. This report exists as part of the pretrial litigation strategy. Its purpose is to help a party survive motions and frame issues for trial, not to prove a case to the public or render a final judgment. Expert reports at this stage are tools. Critiquing an expert report is not about silencing women. It's actually about engaging with the legal record instead of letting loud voices, emotions, or social media decide for us. If additional individuals have claims, the proper place for those claims is sworn testimony and formal filings, not being retroactively folded into someone else's law. Now, that's in regards to all of these depositions and experiences of other people that we've already seen recently hit the docket. None of those incidents are being added to this case. They don't contribute to or prove the claims that Blake is making. Haggerty's report should be read carefully and not weaponized. Experts assist courts, they don't replace them. Disagreeing with an expert opinion is not misogyny. This is a tool. This is a part of the legal process. It is supposed to be here. It's to help provide detailed information for us to understand the inner workings of this case. Now, let's get into this document. Just for confirmation, you can see here it is document 1113, Exhibit 1, cover page for James Haggerty when it was published, or completed, I should say. They do a really good job of outlining the information that you're going to find in here. That's standard. So let's get into it and see some of the information that he details. Here are his qualifications. My name is James F. Haggerty. I am president and CEO of PRCG, Haggerty LLC, a New York-based public relations firm with an international reputation in crisis communications, litigation communications, and other sensitive reputational communication situations. One of the first things to notice here is that he states right up front that he is working out of New York. And I don't think that that's something that should be dismissed. I think that is possibly one strategy that Wayfarer Party is trying to give weight to the venue of New York being the proper and appropriate place for this case to be pursued, and not trying to attack the California CRD portion, but rather trying to bring attention to the fact that why did this go through California? Why is California involved at all? Right off the bat, we see that Haggerty establishes himself as a New York-based public relations firm. And I think that that's really important to look at, because I don't think that Wayfarer Party is doing this without a purpose. I think the purpose of why they keep using New York-based professionals is because they're trying to bring attention to the proper and appropriate venue. It's kind of a way of giving weight, and also at the same time to highlight the question, why was California ever involved? It's not attacking it, it's just building the ability to make that question. Why was California ever a place that this complaint went through? I don't think that it's without strategy that that happens over and over. Okay, so New York-based public relations firm, also an attorney admitted in 2 states, and the author of several books on communications. I served as a columnist for American Lawyers Corporate Counsel from 2011 to 2014, writing a column on the interplay among media, legal, and crisis issues and reputation. Over the years, I have also authored articles, white papers, and other material on communications topics, which have appeared in publications that include USA Today, the National Law Journal, the New York Law Journal, Business Law Today, American Bar Association, Forbes, Fortune, Entrepreneur, and other publications. I am an adjunct professor of law at Stetson University College of Law in St. Petersburg, Florida, teaching a course entitled Advocacy in the Court of Public Opinion. I am also president of Reputation Advisors International, RAI, a global nonprofit business association of senior communications professionals in 13 cities around the world. I have been involved in public relations work, including crisis, litigation, and other areas of sensitive communications since 1985, and in my present firm, which I own since 1993. By at least the mid-1990s, I began to specialize in crisis communications, litigation communications, and related fields. This report is based on my public relations, crisis communications, and litigation communications experience, which has been developed over the course of 30 plus years. Over the years, I have worked in government and with public companies, private companies, nonprofit organizations, labor unions, and high-profile individuals. I work every day with clients on public perception, reputation management, and related strategy during critical communications situations. It should be noted, however, that I am not a celebrity publicist, and I have never testified as an expert witness at trial or by deposition. That said, in the past 3 decades, I have been involved in some of the largest lawsuits of their kind in history, including where it is not a violation of client confidentiality. I refer to the specific cases. The fact that they have this caliber of an expert coming into this, because hold on, the largest single family Holocaust restitution claim over key parcels of land in central Berlin, including the land upon which a portion of Hitler's bunker was built, the Wertheim department store litigation. Okay, that's right out of the gates. This is the expert that they've brought in. They are not playing. Okay. This one, if you know me, if you've been around here long enough, you know that I'm Alaska Native. You know, I literally almost started crying when I first read this. And then I had to hold myself because I was like, wait a minute, what side was he on? This could either be really emotionally good or really emotionally bad. The largest class action lawsuit ever filed against the United States government. Okay, I want to read that again. The largest class action lawsuit ever filed against the United States government, the Coble Indian Trust case. If you're Native, you know. Okay, if you're a Native ally, you know. And if you don't know, the Coble Indian Trust case is massive. Eloise Coble is, I can't believe that there's not more information out there about her. She is the literal Erin Brockovich of what a lot of people refer to as Indian country. I'm really trying to hold back the emotions on this one. She was a Blackfeet banker who discovered that the US government had been mismanaging and in many cases losing trust funds owed to individual Native Americans for generations. These royalties were from oil, gas, timber, grazing, and land leases held in trust by the federal government on behalf of Native people all throughout the US. What Coble uncovered wasn't a clerical error, it was systemic. For over a century, the government could not properly account for billions of dollars it was legally obligated to manage. Records were missing, destroyed, incomplete, or never kept at all. Coble filed a lawsuit in 1996, Coble v. Salazar, originally Coble v. Babbitt, not as a politician or a lawyer, but as a citizen. I'm getting chills. But as a citizen who refused to accept, we don't know where the money went, as an answer. That's literally what was being said. That was literally the answer many people were giving over and over as she was doing the uncovering and the research behind what was happening with these funds. And she was just an average banker. She was just a regular, everyday citizen. And she was just asking what happened. This case dragged on for more than a decade. So when Haggerty is referencing this case, it's nothing small. This is massive, and I'll explain more of that as we go in this little explainer. Coble faced intimidation. She had character attacks. There was surveillance of her and relentless institutional resistance. The government repeatedly argued that proper accounting was impossible, essentially admitting failure while trying to avoid any responsibility in relation to the missing or misappropriated funds. In 2009, the case, It means a lot to Native people all throughout the US. In 2009, the case settled for $3.4 billion, one of the largest class action settlements in US history. It was not a win in the sense of full justice. There were so many losses, this could never be recovered. But it was a landmark acknowledgement that the federal government had violated its trust responsibilities to Native people all throughout the US. Cobal's significance isn't just the settlement, it's that she forced accountability where the system had normalized neglect, and she had proved that even the most powerful institutions can be challenged when someone is willing to document, persist, and refuse to be silenced. Eloise Cobel wasn't symbolic, she was precise, relentless, and evidence-driven. Eloise Cobel did something she didn't have to do. She noticed something was wrong, she noticed something was off, and she kept asking questions. What happened here? What happened here? And because she did not give up, because she persisted, she was able to win this settlement. And who knows how much money was actually lost or misappropriated and not paid to the people that were in contract, were in agreement with that this is where the funds should have been paid for all of these years. It is very similar to the storyline behind Killers of the Flower Moon. It's another arm, it's another appendage of that type of mismanagement. Eloise Cobel has since passed. She was very sick, and towards the end of her plight in this settlement, it was very hard for her to continue on, but she stayed with it. And by the end, she had a lot of support and a lot of people in her corner. But she had no legal training. She had no knowledge or understanding of what she was getting herself into or where it would lead to. And because of her, there are, like I said, annual distributions to the people who deserved those funds for all of those years. And that's why I cannot believe that we don't know more about Eloise Cobel and why there hasn't been more coverage of her in the media, except for the fact that this was against the government. And therein lies probably the reason why there hasn't been much more attention given to this in the media, because they don't want egg on their face. So when Haggerty is citing the Cobel case, he is citing a case that was for years in the courts and was one that was highly sensitive and highly contentious. Because when it comes down to the idea that a woman like Eloise Cobel is being surveilled by the government, which they don't state that outright, but that's who she was up against, and that's who put her under surveillance because of how contentious this case became. And that's why I have to stop myself from the emotions of reading that Haggerty was involved in this and thinking, my mind goes to Jedi Rebellion and the Wayfarer Party, Baldoni. We're all going to be Jedi members of the rebellion on this side. And yet I have to remind myself that no, it's a very mixed bag on this side. They're all professionals who have contributed in many different ways to cases, and oftentimes from the standpoint of my own opinion and thoughts and beliefs, some of the people that are involved in this case on the Wayfarer side are not people that I would want to align myself with, but because of their expertise and capability, they are present and putting in the work on behalf of this case. And I think that puts us back into the perspective that legal action and representation is about the history and experience of those professionals and not of the thoughts, opinions, or likability of said individuals. And so in my mind, when I read that Haggerty is citing the Cobel case, there is the possibility that he may have been representing the opposing side against Cobel. And part of that is because of the privacy. Not just the privacy, but the PR spin. He may have been an expert on the side of the government. I don't know. I haven't been able to confirm, but it's why I had to tamp down the emotions and recognize, oh, we don't know whose side he was representing or how. And emotionally, for me, that could either be really good or really bad, in my opinion. Uh, so know that the Coble case is not something small or insignificant. This is the fact that he follows up this list right after the Holocaust restitution claim with the Coble case as the second case that he's citing. That's massive. And the next one that he lists is that he, at the time, the largest divorce and child custody case in history, Duff versus Perlman, one of the largest global financial fraud investigations in history, at the time, the largest intellectual property verdict and appeal, several of the largest antitrust cases in history, and the largest bankruptcy in post war German history involving one of Europe's preeminent media companies, and at the time, the largest employment discrimination class action in history. So you can kind of see from that list, those first two items were the heavy hitters for sure. And the rest of it, kind of procedural. I mean, just the way he writes about it. And that's not to say that they're small potatoes either. I'm sure that if that had been the body of his expertise and history, it would stand on its own. Let's get back to what he was saying. My firm has also worked on a host of other sensitive and highly charged cases involving, among other areas, financial services, product liability, defamation and First Amendment issues, real estate, organized labor, sexual harassment, intellectual property, money laundering, and bribery, trusts and estates and family succession, bankruptcy, and international espionage. My work is well known and recognized both nationally and internationally. I have been repeatedly named by London-based International Legal Directory, Chambers and Partners as one of the top communications professionals in the United States. Over the years, reviews and Chambers have called me a powerhouse who thinks on a different level, bringing a double barrel of legal and media experience to my work. In 2017, PR News named me to its list of 50 game changers for my work as a trailblazer in litigation communications. In 2023, Business Insider named me as one of 18 top public relations experts CEOs scramble to hire in a crisis. I am the author of two notable books in the communications field. The first, in the Court of Public Opinion, Winning Strategies for Litigation Communications, was first published in 2003 by John Wiley and Sons. The book deals specifically with communications during lawsuits and other legal disputes. The second and third editions of In the Court of Public Opinion were published in 2009 and 2019 by the American Bar Association. I eventually took back the rights to the book and published a new third edition through Heart Harvest Press, a publishing imprint I own. Financial Times called the first edition of In the Court of Public Opinion the perfect handbook for this age of show trials. It has been positively featured and or reviewed in such publications as the New York Law Journal, PR Week, O'Dwyer's PR Services Report, the Boston Herald, and the Champion, a publication of the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys. In addition, the public relations trade publication Holmes Report noted that I literally wrote the book on litigation PR. In 2017, I wrote Chief Crisis Officer Structure and Leadership for Effective Communications Response, published in hardcover by the American Bar Association, which more broadly focused on, in this age of instantaneous media and social media, having the leadership and planning in place before a crisis hits. In 2019, a paperback edition was published with a new preface. As with In the Court of a Public Opinion, I eventually retook the rights to Chief Crisis Officer and published a new paperback edition with a new preface in 2023. Chief Crisis Officer has been positively featured in media that include the Harvard Business Review, Fortune Magazine, and Entrepreneur. In its review, Harvard Business Review noted to prepare properly for negative reputational events. and Chief Crisis Officer Haggerty suggests that companies take three preemptive steps. Designate an insider who will manage any situation that might arise, not the CEO, but someone trusted enough to make a big decision, such as the CEO's chief of staff, an experienced PR hand, or an assistant general counsel. Appoint a rapid response team to help that person and give that team some scenario training. Chief Crisis Officer was also featured in the book Collaborative Crisis Management, University of Chicago Press, 2022, by Thomas A. Cole and Paul Verbinen, which notes that Haggerty outlines a process he calls ACT, which stands for Assess, Create, and Train, as the best way to be prepared. Assess potential crises and the teams that will handle them. Create a plan of action that includes the checklists, templates, and other resources you will need in the event of a crisis, and train the crisis team as well as the broader team where applicable, and tabletop virtual scenarios to ensure the plan is executed properly in a variety of situations. Does any of that start to sound familiar? Does it start to sound at all like anything that we've seen come out of the documents in this case, especially from the Wayfarer side? Just asking. In this report, I will call upon the material in both in the Court of Public Opinion and Chief Crisis Officer to discuss, among other issues, standard practices and in the public relations industry when dealing with sensitive reputational situations and the importance of being prepared for response before a crisis occurs. My full curriculum vitae attached as Exhibit A provides additional details on my background and qualifications. The assignment. I have been retained by Leiner Friedman Tatelman Cooley LLP on behalf of its clients to prepare a report on crisis communications planning, scenario planning, and standard public relations practice when facing potentially negative reputational events. I was asked to provide an analysis of best practices in the field of public relations and its subcategory, crisis communications, as well as the reasons for undertaking these best practices to minimize reputational risk and prevent damage to personal and organizational brand. I have reviewed the scope of work document prepared by the agency group, TAG, a crisis communications firm, and a document entitled Scenario Planning. It ends with us, prepared by TAG and publicly available documents. I have not worked with either law firm in the past, nor have I ever met or worked with any of the parties in this litigation. The analysis presented is up to date as of October 10th, 2025. I reserve the right to amend or supplement my opinions if new information becomes available. So let's go back and check these footnotes just to see if there's anything we should be looking at. Nope. Okay. Parties and factual background. The facts of this case are covered exhaustively in the legal filings and will not be repeated at length here. Following, however, is my understanding of the relevant facts and claims. This lawsuit and related actions involves disputes between Blake Lively, an actress, and Justin Baldoni, an actor. Miss Lively and Mr. Baldoni both starred in the film It Ends With Us. Now get into the footnotes because look at how beefy this information is. I was assisted in the preparation of this report by my colleagues, PRCG, Haggerty LLC, and its affiliated consultants, whom I supervised. Throughout my report, the word I is used to refer to work conducted by myself, assisted by these colleagues under my direction. For the purposes of writing this report, I am being compensated at a rate of $925 per hour. I will be compensated at a rate of $1,100 per hour for deposition and or trial testimony. My compensation is in no way contingent on the nature of my findings, the presentation of my findings in this report or subsequent testimony, or the outcome of this or any other proceeding. I have no other interest in this proceeding. Throughout this report, the sources I cite use the terms organization, company, corporation, CEO, or brand in different circumstances. As described in my book, Chief Crisis Officer, while there are differences, the general concepts and standards of practice remain the same regardless of the individual or entity. A high profile actor, for example, may be at the same time an individual, a brand, and a company official. You are very much a business and a brand of your own. All of those around you need to be skilled in the management of crisis events, and you should have a personal crisis response plan in place for that tweet, social media post, or other public action that can threaten your brand and your livelihood. Chief Crisis Officer, page 19. I'm terrible at reading Roman numerals. Miss Lively is referred to by name in this report, while her attorneys are usually referred to as Lively's attorneys. The movie was co-produced by Wayfarer Studios, LLC. Along with Mr. Baldoni, Steve Starwitz is a co-founder of Wayfarer. Jamie Heath is the chief executive officer of Wayfarer. The agency group is TAG, is a public relations firm specializing in crisis communications that was hired. On or about, this is such a beefy document. I want to get to the most important points. On or about August 2nd, 2024, Wayfarer retained TAG to provide crisis management services to the other Wayfarer parties. At the time of their hiring, rumors were swirling regarding issues during the filming of It Ends With Us and strife between Miss Lively and Mr. Baldoni. In the weeks leading up to August 6th, premiere of It Ends With Us, Miss Lively and others unfriended Mr. Baldoni on social media, and Mr. Baldoni was not allowed to be seen with Miss Lively at the premiere. Just after the premiere, news broke of the rift between Miss Lively and Mr. Baldoni, and the dispute became a major media and social media story. On December 20th, 2024, Miss Lively filed an administrative complaint with the California Civil Rights Department, alleging sexual harassment and other abuses by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer during the production of It Ends With Us. Synchronized with this filing, New York Times published a story with accompanying video entitled, "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine," which provided details of the CRD complaint and Mr. Baldoni's alleged actions, as well as material taken from Miss Abel's personal mobile phone. On December 31st, Miss Lively filed a complaint in this action, making similar allegations of relevance to this report. In the instant action, Miss Lively claims that TAG was retained not to provide standard crisis communication services given the perceived threat of reputational damage, but rather to engage in a sophisticated press and digital campaign to smear her in retaliation for the exercise of her right to speak up about Wayfarer's misconduct on set. The work of TAG and others working on Wayfarer's behalf is described as a smear campaign, and it is alleged in the SAC is not in keeping with standard practices in public relations industry and in its subcategory, crisis communications. Before we go to the rest of the document, I just want to look at this because this is giving us the briefest explanation of what he is defining with this document. I know we've already read a lot of the pages, but I don't want to read you all 47. I'll save you some time. Crisis communications management in the face of reputational risk has long been an accepted ethical and standard practice to mitigate potential issues in the media, in social media, and before other key audiences. In a modern media age, lack of preparedness can greatly accelerate a reputational crisis. Thus, the lack of crisis communications planning can be highly damaging to brand and reputation. With that, he's basically saying this is not only normal, but responsible. When you are a business, an organization, somebody who's in the public eye, it would be reckless to not have some form of planning ahead of time or even a system in place. B, rather than evidence of nefarious intent, the hiring of a crisis management consultant is ethical, prudent, and standard practice. Popular media and misinformation regarding the role of the crisis communications manager feed the inaccurate and negative perception of these professionals. So basically just setting up the idea that this doesn't signal anything. Doing this is not evidence of anything. The scope of work agreement prepared by TAG and the subsequent scenario planning document are in keeping with standard practice in the crisis communications field as evidence of reactive crisis planning. D. Effectively changing public opinion in media and social media tends to take weeks or more often months. It is highly unlikely that negative reputational sentiment could have been artificially created over the course of mere days. Interesting point here, because this almost, in my opinion, gives more credence to the idea that this was an organic shift, because I think it was really underestimated how many people have had a long-standing questionable relation with the image, the persona of Blake Lively. I think that there's been enough mistakes over the years that a lot of people have been side-eyeing, kind of waiting for the next thing, and have been leery. So I think it kind of gives weight to the idea that no PR person, no PR effort could have shifted the opinion this quickly. That's just my thoughts. That's just my opinion. E. Tools to measure media and social media sentiment are sometimes less effective during crises, litigation, or other sensitive dispute-related public issues. There is a need, therefore, to drill down on the data, particularly when attempting to discover causal relationships. That's something that they talk about in this report later on, and I think they bring up a very good point. They include the charts and graphs, like the analysis that the Lively Party has tried to use to say, see, look at how bad things became after they said this. See all of these bad headlines and these articles. And really, in truth, what Haggerty goes on to describe is that if you really look at the articles and the headlines that are behind these analyses, they don't really say that, which is funny, because isn't that basically what I was saying in my post about Stephanie Jones? Where is the smear? Is this a smear or is this an ad? That's one thing that this whole thing is exposing, is actually the playbook of PR people and how they spin headlines and spin stories in order for us to look the opposite direction from what is actually happening in those articles and in those headlines. What I think they're also stating isn't just that, the claims of August being this massive problem and issue with the PR smear campaign with Blake Lively, etc. I think they're also painting the picture that it couldn't have been August. It couldn't have been the crisis PR team causing or creating this shift, because even then they would have had to have weeks or months ahead of time in planning. What we see instead is, at best, maybe a couple of weeks. There is the planning, the scenario possibility, and I think, again, both sides may have underestimated the organic and already established distrust of Blake Lively. And so the moment something has happened where now her behavior and her whole persona is in question, neither side was prepared for the force with which the revisiting of prior behavior, etc., was going to come forward in this case. Maybe perhaps in that way, that is what made Blake so alarmed, was to think that there were so many people ready to dislike her, but that had already been a feature of her career since at least Gossip Girl. Because if you really think about it, the failure of Preserve in 2014, that was the general public essentially rejecting her personality and her brand. So it's almost odd to think that she wouldn't be prepared for the idea that, again, her brand and her image would be rejected. But if you think about the other things that I've been talking about in my other playlist, in terms of her patterns of behavior, it would fit. It would fit with a person who's not willing to accept new information and come to a new conclusion. They repeat the same thing endlessly to no end and believe that they're going to get a different outcome. The prior issues that Blake has faced, she's been so baffled by the fact that those have ever happened, or that people have ever perceived her the way that they did, that she could never accept that that could happen again. Because when there's somebody who has these patterns of behaviors, these patterns of beliefs, etc., they will do whatever they can to justify, and the blame will get shifted elsewhere. It wasn't me, it was that. It wasn't me, it was this other thing. It wasn't me, it was what all of these other people did. It wasn't me, it's that all of these people have the wrong idea. And instead of integrating all of that and coming to a new conclusion, I just had a really big interruption, so I'm not really sure where to pick up from. Let's see if I can get us back on track. I wanted to revisit the contents because now that we've gone through at least up to page 12, we know a lot of the detailed information that's going to help us process the rest of this document. Now, the rest of the document, there is a lot of information, but what it does is exactly what the contents tells us here. An overview of crisis communication and scenario planning with the initial analysis, scenario planning for potential crises, the baseline response, media monitoring, and misperceptions about the field of crisis communications. That's where I want to go to next. That brings us all the way down to page 19 and flows us into page 20. Now, misperceptions about the field of crisis communication, some of the information that he provides here is, but what is a crisis management consultant? And what is the importance of retaining such a consultant to confront potential negative reputational events? Consider this statement from the former head of crisis communications and risk management at Edelman Public Relations, the largest public relations firm in the world. As reported in my book, Chief Crisis Officer, we are the field generals and the surgeons for companies that face destabilizing risk. And in that capacity, we help companies and other entities navigate the unnatural environment that they're thrust into in either high-profile litigation crisis, which is fundamentally a different business challenge than most companies are equipped to handle. That's the excerpt from the book. What Haggerty then adds is, unfortunately, however enormous misconceptions about the field of crisis communications have developed over the past several decades, these misconceptions can lead to the perception that the mere act of hiring of a crisis communications professional is evidence of negative intent. As described in various sources, popular perceptions influenced by television shows, movies, and other popular cultural offerings can sometimes paint a less than accurate picture, unless in a favorable picture of the field. Consider the following from an article entitled The Problem with Crisis Comms, Why Our Present Sparks Suspicion, published by the Crisis Communications Network. Our job is to provide strategic counsel, manage reputational risk, and, when necessary, reshape narratives to reflect the truth rather than public misconception. And yet our existence in a crisis often confirms suspicions that something must be wrong. Professionals are assumed to be working behind the scenes to salvage reputations at any cost, but this assumption fails to recognize that crisis PR, when done ethically, is about strategy, accountability, and guiding organizations through complex reputational challenges. Most crisis communications professionals know that good crisis management is all about preparation. It seems entirely logical that any diligent CEO might, and arguably should, retain crisis communications experts, not just in response to crises, but to prevent them from escalating in the first place. I also addressed this issue specifically beginning in 2017 with the first edition of my book, Chief Crisis Officer, Structure and Leadership for Effective Communications Response, published by the American Bar Association, where I write, there is a mythology around the crisis manager, the fixer, the spine doctor, the operative, forged through movies and television programs over the past few decades. The shady Svengali, moving in the shadows of buried facts, getting the right people to say the right things, the fixer who knows what strings to pull and buttons to push to make a problem go away, the sleek operative dropping on an envelope with incriminating photos on a reporter's desk, or trading a good story for a better story, not involving their client. I'd love to say that my business works that way. Not only would my job be easier, but I personally would seem a lot more interesting. But that's not what we do in the crisis communications business. More recently, consider the commentary of a crisis communications professional appearing with several college colleagues on National Public Radio in August 2025 when discussing the television show Scandal, which appeared on the ABC television network from 2012 to 2018, and its misrepresentations of the practice of crisis communications. What I like about the fact that Scandal aired was that it introduced crisis communications to a wide swath of the general public. But the day in, day outs of folks like Amanda, Molly, and me are probably quite different from Olivia Pope. I can only speak for myself, but I know, I've never had anybody stagger into my office telling me that they woke up next to someone and they don't know what to do with the body, or I can confirm unequivocally that I've never slept with the President of the United States, unlike Olivia Pope. I think, too, the assertion that it's truth twisting, I kind of reject that premise on its face, because I think that's a negative sort of way of looking. And I also think people tend to think about crisis communications as they use other disparaging sort of terms like spin doctor, etc., damage control. I actually think the inverse is true, and the most effective way to manage a crisis is to do something that I would describe as press the truth, which is that you're taking an active role as an organization or an individual in driving a narrative based on the fact. I want to stop right there because that is very interesting considering what we have seen come out of the Baldoni side, the August 2024 era. Everything that Haggerty has provided up to this point has either dissolved some of the claims that Blake Lively is making, and or it's supporting the actions and behaviors that Wayfarer actually engaged in August of 2024. One thing that stands out to me about that is that we are talking about Wayfarer. We are talking about Steve Sarwitz's studio. I would think that Steve Sarwitz likely has experience that would have let him know that, or even have legal teams, etc., that give him the insight that this is what you should be doing and have his bases covered. So I think there's a few things that are of benefit to Wayfarer. Steve Sarwitz has the business experience, and has the access and resources. And that's only half of the equation that is in their favor. Because I think another major part in the potential success that Wayfarer has up until this point is that they are Wayfarer. It's Justin Baldoni, it's Jamie Heath. What we haven't seen is what possibly could have happened if it had been any other group of men. Men who are not so focused on faith, on religion, on interpersonal skills or emotional intelligence. We likely would have seen, with this much pressure happening for as long as it did, because with some of the notes and some of the information that has come forward, we know that this behavior from Lively and her camp has been happening since as early as 2023. So that's in my opinion, the other half of the equation that is playing a large part as to why Wayfarer still has a leg to stand on, because they haven't exploded. They haven't crumbled and started to insult or get mad and push back in a way that other people may have if they had to endure this much stress for as long as Wayfarer most likely has been subjected to. And I said it in another post that Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer were pretty much forced into this situation once she had come up with the accusation, once she made the complaint on day 2 of being on the set. Because if they had done anything to fire her, replace her, etc., she would have had the opportunity to turn around and claim damages. She would have had the opportunity to say that she was negatively impacted. By that means, she wouldn't have been in the position where she is now, where she doesn't have much to say that she has suffered damages, that she has been harmed. She got everything that she wanted. This expert witness, in my opinion, to this point has provided us a lot of details and information to not only solidify why Wayfarer has done what they've done, whether it was because of Haggerty's influence or because they have maybe a PR person. I don't know the training or the know-how that Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan specifically have, but it sounds like they're well versed. And they essentially followed the same or similar path that James Haggerty is suggesting here, because the articles that we can look at from August of 2024 that we can assume are being produced by Wayfarer and Justin Baldoni are articles that were shifting the narrative to the purpose of the movie, shifting the narrative to the reason why Justin Baldoni wanted this movie to be made. Pretty much everything that was outlined in the planning scenario almost entirely aligns with what Haggerty has laid out here. The next part that I think is so important to visit in this document is the last parts. It's the final several pages of this report. And this one is section C, which it says the time it would take to create a digital marketing program. There are allegations in the SAC that the retention of Miss Nathan and the subsequent retention of another consultant in Texas by the name of Jed Wallace of a company called Street Relations Inc. led to a considerable negative media and social media sentiment beginning on approximately August 8th, 2024. This alleged effort on the part of these parties is, at various points in the complaint, called social manipulation or social attack. It is alleged that this goes beyond standard practice in the public relations professions and involved weaponizing a digital army around the country from New York to Los Angeles and beyond to create, seed, promote, and engage with content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. Based on the allegations in the SAC, it appears Ms. Nathan was not retained by the Wayfarer parties until August 2nd, while Mr. Wallace appeared to not have been hired until at least August 8th, in the same day, which is the same day on which the SAC alleges Miss Lively saw a significant spike in negative sentiment towards her. Based on my experience, it is highly unlikely that a digital marketing plan could be prepared and executed within a few days, if not the same day. Providers in the digital marketing space seem to indicate the same. Consider this article from Aztec, a digital marketing firm. Digital marketing is not a quick fix or a one and done effort with results that happen overnight. If you're looking for a general rule of thumb, you should give digital marketing at least 3 to 6 months to make an impact. Similarly, Metric Marketing, a digital marketing business based in Saline, Michigan, estimates that for search engine optimization, SEO, efforts, it usually takes 3 to 6 months to start seeing results and sometimes up to a year or more for highly competitive industries. While for content marketing, creating content for owned and third-party blogs and media platforms, the time it takes to see meaningful results can range from several months to a year, depending on the quality and relevance of your content. Social media marketing timeframes can be shorter, but even then it can range from weeks to months. To be sure, there are many forms of digital marketing, from SEO to posting on a range of social media sites to more elaborate computer-generated efforts involving chatbots and potentially artificial intelligence. But in my experience in high-profile legal disputes, these efforts take time as well. Here is how they break down the metrics that the Lively team was trying to use to prove that there was this smear campaign happening. So, tools purporting to measure positive and negative media mentions. The SAC provides 3 charts allegedly proving a vast surge in negative media and or social media sentiment that began to spike on August 8th. These include a chart at 326 entitled Net Volume of Positive and Negative Mentions of Blake Lively. And you can see the chart here. And if you can't see that as well, so you can see the measurements that they are gauging this by and the dates. So it's December 13th and June 14th. And then you can see in this area how there was not too much happening here. And then all of a sudden we see a little bump. No pun intended. Jersey flaw. We see a little bump. July 19th of 2024, they're supposedly positive headlines. We see some negatives here and there. And then all of a sudden we see this spike here, and that is August 9th. But equally, it suggests that there are, no, it doesn't have the explainer. These are supposedly the negative commentaries versus the positive. And the positive would be August 30th or thereabouts. Then it describes a chart at 332 entitled Normalized Net Sentiment of Mentions of Blake Lively. And the footnote, notice here, the SAC is unclear as to whether these charts detail media sentiment, social media sentiment, or both. So where this information is coming from, they're not certain. Now, the next chart is normalized net sentiment of mentions of Blake Lively, June 14th to December 19th. And you can see the metrics here again and the dates. This one is quite a bit more active, especially in terms of the positive mentions. And then it drops August 9th, almost in line with the premiere, stays pretty negative until August 30th, and then returns to negative. And we continue to see that trend all the way until December 13th. Now, the thing about this is they can show us these charts all that they want. And you can see the legend here. So positive, not rated, neutral, and negative. So positive here, negative in this red section, neutral, greater than half. And again, the metrics by which they are measuring and the date period all the way up. Well, that's February 8th. So that one is a full year at the very least. Okay. In the SAC, none of these charts give any sense of the methodology used to compile the data, how decisions as to what is a positive or negative mention is determined, or even the monitoring service or software used to compile the sentiment and generate the data. Based upon my experience in preparing these reports in sensitive crisis and legal-related communications matters, it is my opinion that absent further description of methodology and a deeper dive into the media mentions used to inform such data, it is impossible to tell whether this data is an accurate reflection of sentiment. Now, I want to hang on that right there, because what we were just doing when we were looking at the Stephanie Jones articles, we've been led to believe that the articles are part of a smear campaign. But if we look at just the Stephanie Jones article in and of itself, where is the smear? In the end, if you really dissect it and really look at the content of what is in that article, it starts to look like an ad. It might sound, if you were only listening to the words, it might sound to a lay person that it was talking about a terrible experience of an employee. But if you are an industry insider and you are somebody potentially looking for a PR specialist, Those might be things that sound attractive to have somebody passionate, somebody who's willing to go out of their way and potentially be wrong, but they aren't, as the article clarified with the mention of the inappropriate behavior, but it turns out Stephanie Jones wasn't wrong. That's what this sentence is talking about. It is impossible to tell whether this data is an accurate reflection of sentiment. And what happens and what we're learning from this case is that with PR, a lot of times what PR people are expecting is that the majority of society will read the headline and that's the end of it. The headline is the extent of the information that they will get out of the article or publication. They are banking on the fact that very few people will click the link and actually read the article. So then, in that regard, the first two paragraphs, they're going to have the strongest information about the circumstances. Anything beyond those two paragraphs, a lot of times, in my opinion, PR people are expecting that someone is going to have scrolled away by that point. So anything after those first two paragraphs is almost moot. What this case has revealed to us is how something potentially negative or undesired will happen, and then articles or other things will be published in order to kind of cover over the prior negative attention or headlines, the things that they don't want people paying attention to. What it's trying to say is that it's almost impossible to tell whether this data is an accurate reflection of sentiment. Because again, PR, and especially the way that the Lively team has been navigating this case, there's been ways of redirecting attention, of pulling attention away from the things that they don't want the public to be looking at. What Haggerty then says is, this is for a simple reason. Absent further analysis, it could be the case that any mention of the dispute between Miss Lively and Mr. Baldoni would be recorded as a negative for Miss Lively, regardless of as to how it treats Miss Lively in comparison to Mr. Baldoni, because any mention of the dispute itself could be deemed by its very nature a negative. That is the problem with many tools for measuring online sentiment. The algorithms that produce results lack appropriate nuance for dealing with complicated issues, such as sentiment during disputes. In other words, once the public began to focus on on-set strife between Miss Lively and Mr. Baldoni, the unfriending of Mr. Baldoni on social media sites, and his absence from the premiere of It Ends With Us, any attention to these issues at all could be picked up by media and social media monitoring as a negative. I have faced this issue before in my work and have written about it in my book, Chief Crisis Officer. In Chief Crisis Officer, I describe this problem in the context of reports generated by digital tools that labeled media and social media sentiment as neutral, when this simply could not be the case. And here's a quote. We were working on a very contentious issue during the summer of 2015 for an entertainment company that was in a difficult adversarial negotiation with one of the largest online retailers in the world. Put bluntly, the retailer was putting the screws to my client in a way that only a true monopolist can. The crisis was playing out day to day before the deeply opinionated stakeholders in this community, first in the trade media, then in major media, such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and social media. Let's see at the footnotes. Indeed, although the charts in 326 and 332 end before the New York Times article was published on December 21st, 2024, the chart in 334, though somewhat blurred in the SAC, shows a massive spike in negative social media sentiment coinciding with the publication of the New York Times investigative article entitled "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine," which includes the subhead, "Private Messages Detail an Alleged Campaign to Tarnish Blake Lively After She Accused Justin Baldoni of Misconduct on the Set of It Ends With Us." It would be hard for anyone who read the story on December 21st to conclude it was a negative for Miss Lively. See the New York Times article. Further down, Haggerty then states, upon drilling down into the individual social media posts more carefully, we discovered that the media monitoring service was mismarking results because the criteria they set up, automated following an algorithm for measuring the positive or negative aspects of the issue, was faulty. The problem, the analysis did not consider the underlying tone of the individual articles being forwarded, and the headlines and synopses of those articles were usually neutral in tone. Clearly, a tweet of a positive article is positive, right? If you read the article and agreed with its underlying argument, you tweeted it. In this case, if the tweet didn't include positive commentary on my client's position, the resulting tweet was characterized as neutral rather than positive. There was no way to pick up the overall characterization of the dispute without taking a closer look at the tone of the underlying article being tweeted. We went back and broke down the results. This was no small task, considering the thousands of social media posts related to this issue. As it turned out, instead of 2/3 of the social media being neutral sentiment was less than 20%. The key point here is vis-a-vis the instant case is not that there wasn't negative sentiment, but that without a deeper understanding of the validity of this data, it is impossible to tell. Conclusion. Based on my professional background and experience in the crisis communications field, and after a review of relevant literature related to crisis communications, I am prepared to testify. Y'all, he's prepared to testify. He's prepared to get on the stand. Make note of that. The hiring of a crisis communications consultant in the face of perceived reputational threats should not be considered in any way evidence of a negative or nefarious intent. Rather, it is well established that such a retention is entirely acceptable, appropriate, and prudent for organizations, brands, personal or corporate, and high-profile individuals seeking to mitigate reputational risk, particularly in the face of threats. A misunderstanding of the role of a crisis communications manager often feeds negative perceptions regarding the role of crisis communications. Media monitoring is a standard practice in all public relations, and particularly in crisis communications and other sensitive communications matters, and should not be seen as an effort at social media manipulation. The scope of work document prepared by the TAG agency, as well as the document entitled Scenario Planning, It Ends With Us, are in keeping with standard crisis communications planning practices. The growth in media and social media coverage negative to Miss Lively, starting in August 2024, is unlikely to have been caused by the work done by the crisis communications consultants hired by the Wayfarer parties, given the short time frame. Tools to measure media and social media sentiment are sometimes less effective during crises, litigation, or other sensitive dispute-related public issues. There is a need, therefore, to drill down on the data, particularly when attempting to discover causal relationships. And then we get back into their work experience. Also in this document is the agency group, their planning document. So if you want to review it here, you can take a look here. I know it's been elsewhere throughout the docket, but just in case you want to read it in relation to this report, you have it right there. And the scenario planning. So there you have it. In essence, the things that I have been saying in regards to Stephanie Jones, the post that I did just the other day, Haggerty's research is kind of backing up what I was saying, that if you really dig beyond the headline, is it really a smear campaign? Is it really a smear article? Is it really what Blake Lively and her team is claiming that it is? Because we looked at the Stephanie Jones article as an example, and there were things in there that if you look at it through a lens of who the audience of that article is, it changes the context. It changes the tone. It's no longer an insult. It's actually things that people from the inside of the industry might actually appreciate, might actually want in someone who's representing them. I think in that regard, what we are seeing come out of this case is incredible amounts of PR, incredible amounts of fighting in the court of public opinion. It's not necessarily aimed at evidence. It's not necessarily aimed at anything that will happen in the courtroom. Right now, there is so much that is being done to mold, shift, and redirect the attention of the general public and to form an opinion without digging into the details so that, people can look at something at first glance and say, oh, I saw the headline and make the assumption. I do believe that they are also banking on the idea that they believe that there are a greater number of people out there that will have trust in media, that will have trust in these publications. This article and the headline says this, so it must mean that everything that follows that headline in the article is going to support and agree and prove what that headline says. They are willing to pull these maneuvers and strategies and hope that the majority of us are not paying attention. Because that's the other thing. We hear it even from celebrities that have been involved in other uh, conflicts, other struggles, where I've heard, I can't remember which specific celebrity it was, but they were telling someone, the average person isn't going to be reading about these things, isn't going to find all of this information. And you can walk into a room feeling bogged down, upset, embarrassed, ashamed, what have you. And you can walk into a room and nobody in that room has any idea of what has been in the headlines. So I think that that's in large part what we're seeing happen with this case is that they are moving in a way that they are in belief that there are not people paying attention to this information. And we've seen that pattern of behavior before, specifically with Blake, where she can't comprehend or she's not willing to believe that there are people that pay attention this intently. Because if we look back to the Book Bonanza interview and the moment where she is astonished that when she put the little clip of Finding Nemo music in the credits, and she was astonished that the audience caught on to that as quickly as they did. And she couldn't believe that people would be able to notice something that small. It's almost like she's not met her best friend. It's almost like she doesn't know the plight of Swifties, that the entire fan base of Taylor Swift is absolutely locked in. They are tuned into everything, watching everything, cross-referencing, deep diving, and going back through their own history, going through the history of the tour, of the albums, for her to not understand that we would notice something as simple as the music from Finding Nemo in the credits. And to be as bewildered as she was is I just it's almost like, have you met your best friend? Do you know about her fan base or how relentless they are in finding information? Because let me tell you, Taylor herself has said, it's felt a little Zodiac, a little Zodiac killer at times. And Blake doesn't understand the extent that people will go to confirm information that they are questioning. And I think that's happening a lot with this case is that her and her team are moving in a way that they don't believe that people will cross-check, cross-reference, and do what they can, do their due diligence to find that if there's information to back up the claims that are being made in this case, or the statements that are being made, or even the comments. So that was a very long way of getting through this document. I thank you for going through it all with me. And I hope to see more questions. I appreciate all of the time and attention that you have put into my platform. You've really helped me already to this point, and I am working on more things behind the scenes. I just started another web page, so hopefully I'll have a broader ecosystem of information coming and going, and in that way, I will also be able to provide you better content, and just thank you for being here.